In 1985, a black family drove their van into the Kentucky hills on a secret historical quest and vanished. The police said they were lost, tragic victims of a cave-in. For 10 years, that was the only story. Then, a flood tore open a hidden part of the mountain, revealing the family's van, perfectly preserved, sitting silently in a vast, dark cavern. But the van was empty. The discovery didn't just reopen a cold case. It unearthed a tale of lost Civil War gold, ruthless greed, and a truth more brutal than any simple accident. Before I begin, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? It really means a lot to know you're here with us. We're in this together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The summer of 1985 was, for Robert Vance, a season of feverish, secret excitement. By day, he was a respected high school history teacher in a small town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky. But by night, he was a man possessed, his small study overflowing with brittle survey maps, photocopied Civil War diaries, and obscure geological surveys. Robert, at 38, was an avid amateur historian and spelunker, a man whose passion lay in the forgotten stories and hidden places of his native Kentucky hills. And he believed, with the unshakable certainty of a religious convert, that he was on the verge of the discovery of a lifetime. He was chasing a ghost, the local legend that had been dismissed by serious historians for a century, the lost treasure of Confederate Captain Jedediah Thorne. As the story went, Thorne's small, rogue cavalry unit, entrusted with a cache of Union gold bullion captured during a raid, was cut off by advancing Union forces in 1864. Rather than surrender the gold, they had allegedly hidden the heavy chests deep within an unmapped cave system in the Kentucky mountains, intending to retrieve it after the war. But Thorne and his men were killed in a skirmish days later, taking the secret of the gold's location with them to their graves. For most, it was a fanciful tale told around campfires. But for Robert, it was a complex historical puzzle waiting to be solved. For years, he had pieced together fragments: a cryptic reference in a soldier's diary, a geological survey from the 1920s noting an unusual magnetic anomaly in a specific ridge, a local family's folklore about hollow hills that rang with gold. He had spent countless weekends hiking the remote trails, comparing the old maps to the modern landscape, his boots caked with the red mud of his home state. And now, after all that effort, he believed he had found it. A series of landmarks, when triangulated on his topographical map, pointed to a specific, unlisted cave entrance in a section of the forest so remote it was rarely visited by anyone but the most determined hunters. His younger brother, Elias, a practical, hard-working mechanic, thought Robert was chasing a fool's dream. "Robert, you're a history teacher, not an adventurer," Elias had told him over the phone a week earlier, the smell of grease and motor oil faint in the background. "There ain't no Confederate gold in these hills. Just sinkholes and copperheads." Robert had just laughed, a sound full of genuine, unbridled joy. "Faith, little brother. It's about faith in the historical record. I'm telling you, I've got it. I'm taking Cynthia and Maya out there this weekend for a camping trip. We're going to find it." The trip was planned with a mixture of family fun and secret, obsessive purpose. Robert's wife, Cynthia, a woman whose love for her husband was matched only by her own adventurous spirit, was fully on board, her eyes sparkling at the prospect. Their 11-year-old daughter, Maya, a bright, curious girl who had inherited her father's love for stories, was thrilled by the idea of a real-life treasure hunt. They loaded their family van, a sturdy vehicle equipped for rough terrain, with camping gear, climbing ropes, powerful flashlights, and tucked away in a locked metal case, Robert's precious maps and research notes. On a bright Saturday morning in late July, they set off. They told Elias they were going camping near a popular state park, a small deception to keep their true, remote destination a secret. Robert didn't want a parade of amateur treasure hunters following him. He was a historian on the verge of making history, and he wanted his family to be the only ones there to witness it. They drove deep into the mountains, the paved roads giving way to gravel, then to a narrow, overgrown dirt track that scraped the sides of the van with grasping branches. Robert navigated using his old maps, his excitement so palpable it felt like a physical presence in the vehicle. He parked the van in a small, hidden clearing, a place it seemed no one had visited in years. According to the diary, he said, his voice a low, excited whisper, the cave entrance should be just a half-mile past that creek. They began their hike, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the only sounds the chirping of birds and the crunch of their boots on the forest floor. They were a family on an adventure, walking towards a discovery that would change their lives, and ultimately, end them. They had no way of knowing that they were not the only ones hunting for the lost gold, that another, far more ruthless historian was on their trail, a man who believed the treasure was his by right, and who would stop at nothing to claim it. The entrance to the cave was exactly where Robert Vance's research had predicted it would be, a narrow fissure hidden behind a curtain of dense, hanging moss, almost invisible to a casual observer. The air that breathed from it was cool and carried the ancient, mineral scent of the deep earth. For Robert, it was the smell of history, of a secret kept for over a century. For his wife, Cynthia, and their daughter, Maya, it was the start of a thrilling adventure. Equipped with helmets and powerful flashlights, they ventured inside. The initial passage was narrow, forcing them to move in single file. But it soon opened up into a series of magnificent caverns, their walls glittering with calcite formations that looked like frozen waterfalls. Robert led them deeper, following the cryptic directions from the Confederate soldier's diary, past the stone sentinel, beneath the weeping ceiling. After nearly an hour of careful exploration, they found it. A smaller side chamber, its entrance partially obscured by a rockfall. And inside, sitting in the dusty silence of 120 years, were three heavy, iron-banded military chests. The moment was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. Robert let out a whoop of joy that echoed through the vast cavern. He and Cynthia struggled with the rusted latch of the nearest chest, their hands trembling. With a final, groaning crack of old metal, the lid swung open. The beam of their flashlights fell upon a sight that made them all gasp. It was filled to the brim with gold coins. Union gold dollars, double eagles, glowing with a soft, warm light in the darkness. It was real. The legend was real. Robert had done it. They were laughing, their voices echoing in the chamber, their hands running through the cool, heavy coins, when a new sound joined theirs. A slow, deliberate crunch of boots on gravel from the main cavern. They froze, their joy instantly turning to ice-cold fear. A figure appeared in the entrance to their chamber, a tall, slender man silhouetted against the darkness behind him. He held a powerful lantern, its harsh white light making them flinch. Magnificent, isn't it? The man said, his voice a calm, academic drawl that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. I must congratulate you, Robert. You saved me a great deal of trouble with the final legwork. Robert recognized him immediately. Alistair Finch, a disgraced university professor from the state capital, a man known in historical circles for his brilliant mind and his utterly ruthless, obsessive methods. Finch had been chasing the same legend for years, and he and Robert had exchanged brief, guarded correspondence in the past. Finch, Robert said, his voice tight, moving instinctively in front of Cynthia and Maya. What are you doing here? The same thing you are, my dear fellow. Finch said, taking a step into the chamber. I am here to claim my discovery. He was not alone. Two other, rougher-looking men emerged from the darkness behind him, their expressions grim. This is my discovery, Robert stated, his voice firm, and my family's legacy. Finch let out a soft, pitying laugh. Legacy? My dear Robert, you are a high school history teacher. I am a true historian. This treasure belongs to history, and I am its rightful custodian. You and your family. You are merely a footnote, a brief, unfortunate obstacle. The confrontation was swift and brutal. Finch and his men were armed. The Vance family, armed only with their discovery and their courage, stood no chance. The dark, silent cave, the site of their greatest triumph, became the site of their execution. But Alistair Finch was more than just a killer. He was an obsessive historian, a man who thought in terms of narratives and legacies. A simple murder was messy, undignified. It left too many questions. He needed a perfect crime, a story that would seal the secret of the gold forever. He and his men worked for hours. They transported the bodies of Robert, Cynthia, and Maya back to the family's van. They placed them inside, arranging them to look like they were on a simple outing. Then, in a final act of chilling, intellectual cruelty, Finch decided to create an enduring, unsolvable mystery. He knew something that Robert Vance didn't. His own research had uncovered maps of an old, failed 19th century mining operation that had used a different, much wider cave entrance on the other side of the ridge, an entrance large enough for mules and wagons. It had been sealed by a landslide decades ago, but was accessible to those with the right tools. Using this forgotten access point, Finch and his men began the arduous task of moving the van. They winched and painstakingly maneuvered the vehicle through the wider, wagon-worn passages, a grueling process that took hours of raw, physical labor until it sat in the center of a vast, cathedral-like cavern deep within a mountain. Then they sealed the tomb. From the inside, at a narrow, unstable point in the main, smaller passage that Robert had used, they used carefully placed charges, tools Finch had brought for excavation, to trigger a massive rockfall. Tons of rock and earth thundered down, completely and permanently sealing the chamber from the known parts of the cave system, creating a new, impassable wall of stone. Their work was done. The Vance family and their van were gone, entombed in a hidden cavern no one knew existed. The gold was secured, and Alistair Finch had his perfect crime, a disappearance he was certain would be attributed to a simple, tragic caving accident, a story the world would accept, a secret the earth would keep forever. The official search for the Vance family began a week after they disappeared. Only after Elias Vance, Robert's younger brother, had made a series of increasingly frantic calls, first to his brother's home, then to the state police. The initial response from the local county sheriff, a man named Brody, was a study in dismissive bureaucracy. Went camping up in the hills, you say? Sheriff Brody had drawled over the phone to Elias. Son, people get lost up there all the time. He'll turn up when he gets tired of eating berries. But Elias persisted. He knew his brother. Robert was an experienced outdoorsman, not a reckless fool. He would not have simply gotten lost. After days of pressure, a search was finally launched. They found Robert's car parked at the remote trailhead, but of the van, there was no sign. An initial team of park rangers and volunteer cavers made a cursory sweep of the main, mapped cave entrance nearby. They went in a few hundred feet, saw nothing out of the ordinary, and quickly came to a conclusion. The official report was a masterpiece of convenient fiction. It stated that Robert Vance, an amateur spelunker, had likely led his family into an unmapped section of the cave system where they had been trapped by a natural rockfall or cave-in. The report noted that a recent collapse was visible deep within the main cave passage, making any further search prohibitively dangerous and likely fruitless. The case of the missing Black family, whose ambitious historical quest was now reframed as a reckless folly, was quietly closed. It was a tragedy, the sheriff told the local paper, but a predictable one. The mountains had claimed them. For Elias Vance, this official narrative was a lie that burned like a low-grade fever for the next 10 years. He was a practical man, a mechanic who understood the world through the logic of engines and machines. The story never made sense. Robert was meticulous. He would never have taken his wife and child into an unstable, unmapped cave without extreme precautions. And where was the van? The police had no answer. It was just gone. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. Elias's life, once simple and straightforward, became defined by his brother's absence. He became the reluctant guardian of their legacy. He would go to his brother's now silent house, the air thick with the smell of dust and grief, and sit in his study. He pored over Robert's research notes, his maps, his highlighted passages in old history books. He was searching for a clue, for something the police had missed. He saw the name Alastair Finch, mentioned in some of Robert's correspondence, a fellow historian with a shared interest in Civil War legends. He even called Finch's old university department, only to be told that Dr. Finch had retired abruptly in late 1985 and his whereabouts were unknown. It was another dead end. In 1990, 5 years after the disappearance, Elias, armed with his brother's detailed maps and a growing certainty of foul play, went back to the original sheriff, Brody, who was still in power. He requested, pleaded, for the case to be reopened. He laid out his brother's research on the desk, pointing to the inconsistencies in the accident theory. Sheriff Brody listened with a look of profound boredom, leaning back in his chair until it groaned. "Mr. Vance," he sighed, "we've been over this. Your brother took his family into a dangerous cave and had an accident. It's tragic, but it's over. You need to let those people rest in peace." "They're not resting in peace." Elias shot back, his voice rising. "They're a mystery. What about the van? What about the other people he was writing to, like this Finch character?" Brody held up a hand. "Son, your brother was chasing a ghost story. A treasure hunt. It's a fantasy. He got in over his head. Now, I'm sorry for your loss. I truly am. But there is no case here. Just a man's grief getting the better of him. I suggest you go home and focus on your own life." The dismissal was absolute, condescending. Elias left that office with the cold, hard understanding that the system had no interest in the truth. The disappearance of a black family chasing a historical dream was not a story that warranted a sustained investigation, not a mystery that powerful people wanted solved. It was easier to let them be another sad legend, another family lost to the wild, unforgiving hills of Kentucky. For the next 5 years, Elias learned to live with the silence, his own investigation a lonely, frustrating vigil against a wall of official indifference. In the late autumn of 1995, 10 years after the Vance family vanished, the Kentucky hills were ravaged by a storm system of historic proportions. For 3 straight days, torrential rains lashed the mountains, turning gentle creeks into raging rivers and saturating the ancient earth. The storm culminated in a series of flash floods and landslips that reshaped parts of the landscape, toppling ancient trees and scouring ravines clean. Deep within the Daniel Boone National Forest, in the remote, unpatrolled sector where Robert Vance had once parked his van, the floods did something remarkable. The sheer volume of water, surging through the limestone cave system, built up immense hydrostatic pressure behind the deliberate rockfall that Alastair Finch had created a decade earlier. The wall of rock and earth, which had so perfectly sealed the hidden cavern, began to groan, to shift, and then, with a thundering roar that echoed deep within the mountain, it gave way. A torrent of muddy water, rock, and debris burst forth from the cave mouth, carving a new, raw scar down the mountainside. The hidden entrance to the cave was, for the first time in 10 years, open to the world. A few weeks later, a group of young, adventurous university students, a spelunking club from a nearby college, were exploring the aftermath of the floods. They were looking for new, undiscovered cave systems, their passion a mixture of scientific curiosity and pure adrenaline. They stumbled upon a newly opened passage, its entrance a dark, gaping maw that wasn't on any of their maps. Intrigued by the possibility of being the first to explore it, they geared up. They ventured inside, their powerful headlamps cutting through the absolute darkness. The passage was slick with mud, a torrent of water having clearly rushed through it. The air was cold and smelled of damp stone and something else, something metallic and out of place. They followed the passage as it wound deeper into the mountain, their voices echoing in the vast silence. After nearly a mile, the passage opened up into a massive, cathedral-like cavern. And in the center of that cavern, they found it. It was a family van. A vehicle from the 1980s, its paint faded, its tires flat, covered in a fine layer of calcite and dust, but otherwise remarkably preserved by the cave's stable, dry environment. It sat there, silent and impossible, like a relic in a pharaoh's tomb. The students stared, their initial excitement turning to a cold, creeping dread. This was not a natural discovery. This was a crime scene. One of them, his hands shaking, pulled out a satellite phone, a new, expensive piece of gear they carried for emergencies, and made a call to the state police. The news of a van found deep inside a newly discovered cave system landed on the desk of Detective Miles Bishop of the Kentucky State Police. Bishop, a sharp, methodical investigator in his early 40s, was known for his interest in historical cold cases. He immediately pulled the old, thin file on the 1985 disappearance of the Vance family, the one that had concluded with a tragic caving accident. He looked at the report, then at the details from the spelunker's call. An accident? No, this was something else entirely. The cave, after a decade of silence, was finally beginning to breathe its secrets. The extraction of the Vance family's van from the Gilded Cavern, as the media quickly dubbed it, was a logistical and engineering marvel. For 2 days, a specialized team worked to widen the cave entrance and carefully winched the vehicle out of the mountain's depths. The scene was a media circus, the story of the ghost van in the cave, capturing the public's imagination. For Elias Vance, who stood watching from a police cordon, it was a surreal, heart-stopping nightmare. This was it. After 10 years, the truth was about to be revealed. Detective Miles Bishop led the investigation with a meticulous, focused intensity. Once the van was secured in a KSB forensic bay, the real work began. The vehicle was a perfect time capsule of 1985. The interior was coated in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise, it was as if the family had just stepped out. A half-finished bag of snacks sat on the dashboard. Maya's sketchbook lay open on the back seat, a drawing of a smiling son left unfinished. Robert's worn leather jacket was draped over the driver's seat. But the central, horrifying discovery was what was not there. There were no human remains in the van. The family was gone. This instantly shattered the original 1985 theory of a simple cave-in. They hadn't been trapped in their vehicle. They had vanished from it. This turned the van from a simple tomb into a complex, baffling puzzle box. Detective Bishop and his team processed it with a new, urgent question. If this wasn't their grave, then what was it? A decoy? A clue? An engineer on Bishop's team shook his head in disbelief. Detective, getting this van in here, it's damn near impossible. It wasn't driven. The axle would be shattered. This thing was moved inch by inch by a team of people with equipment and an insane amount of determination. Whoever did this wasn't just hiding a crime. They were building a monument to it. The investigation turned to the contents of the van. They found Robert's research notes, his maps, his highlighted passages in old Civil War diaries. And then, in a locked metal case under the passenger seat, they found it. An empty, broken strongbox. Its lock had been smashed, its heavy metal lid pried open. This was the turning point. This wasn't just an accident or a murder. It was a robbery, a high-stakes, historical treasure hunt that had ended in violence. But the team found more than just the empty box. The meticulous forensic sweep, far more advanced than anything available in 1985, uncovered a series of small, baffling clues that made no sense. Tucked into the driver's side door pocket, they found a single, elegant woman's glove, made of a material and in a style that was clearly from the 19th century. It did not belong to Cynthia Vance. Folded neatly inside the glove compartment, they found a tattered, hand-drawn map of Charleston, South Carolina, a city the Vances had never visited. And on the floor of the van, almost invisible in the caked mud, they found a single pressed and dried non-native flower petal, an oleander petal, a flower that did not grow in the Kentucky mountains but was common in the deep South. These clues were a bizarre, curated collection of misdirections. It was as if the killer was not just trying to hide a crime, but was constructing a new, false narrative, playing a game with whoever might eventually find the scene. Detective Bishop sat down with a devastated and confused Elias Vance. "Your brother wasn't a fool chasing fantasies, Elias," Bishop said, his voice full of a new respect. "He was a brilliant historian. We believe he found it. He found the lost Confederate gold, and we believe someone killed him and his family for it. But they did more than that. They left these breadcrumbs, a puzzle. They're trying to send us down the wrong path, to make us think the story went a different way. This killer isn't just brutal, they're arrogant. They're toying with us. For Elias, the revelation was a double-edged sword. His brother was vindicated. But the killer was a ghost who had not only murdered his family, but had left behind a taunting, intellectual puzzle, a final act of contemptuous cruelty. The investigation now had a clear, if difficult, path. They needed to find out who else knew about Robert's research, who else was hunting for that same treasure, and who had the specific, academic arrogance to construct such a bizarre and misleading crime scene. The investigation into the murders of the Vance family shifted from the wilderness of the Kentucky hills to the dusty, quiet world of historical archives and academic rivalries. Detective Miles Bishop, with Elias Vance as his determined partner, began to meticulously reconstruct Robert Vance's final months, focusing on one central question: who knew about his research? They delved into Robert's phone records, his correspondence, the notes from his research. And one name kept appearing, a name that Elias vaguely remembered his brother mentioning with a mixture of admiration and professional unease: Alistair Finch. Finch, they discovered, was a once brilliant but now disgraced university professor, an obsessive historian who had been the foremost academic authority on the legend of the lost Confederate gold. He and Robert had corresponded, sharing findings, debating theories. But Robert's final notes, found in his home study, revealed a growing suspicion of Finch. Robert believed Finch was not just an academic, but a ruthless treasure hunter who was secretly using the university's resources to fund his own private expeditions. The investigation into Finch revealed a man who had abruptly and mysteriously retired from his university position in late 1985, just months after the Vance family disappeared. He had, according to university records, come into a significant, unexplained sum of money around the same time, which he claimed was a family inheritance. He was now living a life of quiet, scholarly luxury in a secluded estate. Detective Bishop had his man. The motive, the means, the opportunity, it all pointed to Finch. But after 10 years, he needed more than just a theory. He needed a confession. The confrontation took place in Finch's magnificent, book-lined study, a room that smelled of old paper and new money. Finch, now an elderly but still imposing figure, met Detective Bishop and Elias Vance with an air of arrogant, academic amusement. He denied everything, his voice a calm, cultured drawl. He was not confessing quickly. This became a tense, psychological cat-and-mouse game. The Vance family? Finch said, steepling his fingers. A tragedy, of course. A classic case of amateur enthusiasm meeting professional geological reality. The mountains are unforgiving. We don't think it was the mountain, Bishop said, his voice even. We think it was you. We found your partial fingerprint on the inside of the strongbox in their van. Finch barely blinked. A print that has degraded for a decade? A box my colleague Robert and I handled together during our research? Hardly conclusive, Detective. What about the money, Alistair? Elias interjected, his voice raw with a decade of grief and anger. The inheritance that appeared right after my brother and his family were murdered for a treasure you both were hunting? Finch smiled, a cold, thin line. My family's financial affairs are hardly the business of the KSB. For an hour, they went back and forth, Finch deflecting every accusation with academic arrogance and plausible deniability. He even used the false clues he had planted to mock their investigation. A glove from the 19th century? An oleander petal? My dear detective, it sounds like you're chasing ghosts and melodrama. Perhaps Mr. Vance had a secret romantic rendezvous in Charleston. He was enjoying the intellectual chase, confident in his own cleverness. The break came when Bishop played his final card. You're right, Dr. Finch. The evidence is circumstantial. But a jury might be interested in the testimony of your former associates. The two men you hired for your expeditions in 1985. We found them. One of them, a man facing his own unrelated charges, is very eager to make a deal. Finch's composure finally, irrevocably, shattered. His face went pale, the mask of scholarly detachment falling away to reveal the cold, hard face of a killer. Faced with the threat of betrayal from his own hired muscle, Finch confessed. He did so not with remorse, but with a chilling, intellectual pride. He recounted how he had tracked Robert Vance for months, letting the high school teacher do the dangerous legwork of finding the cave. He had followed them that day, waited for them to find the gold, and then, with his associates, had confronted and murdered them. The confession was a story of cold-blooded greed and intellectual arrogance. But then came a final, brutal twist. "You've got me on the murders," Finch said with a shrug. "But you will never find them." A good historian never reveals all his sources or all his secrets. He refused, with a final, cruel satisfaction, to reveal where he had disposed of the bodies of Robert, Cynthia, and Maya Vance. Their final resting place was a secret he would take to his grave. Alastair Finch was convicted for the murders and would die in prison a few years later. The lost Confederate gold was eventually recovered from a hidden vault in his estate and turned over to the federal government. Elias Vance had justice. He knew the truth. His brother had been vindicated not as a fool, but as a brilliant historian who had made a world-changing discovery. But that justice was a cold, hollow thing. He had no bodies to bury, no grave to visit. Years later, an older Elias stands at the now-protected entrance to the Gilded Cavern. He has used a portion of the state's reward money to establish a historical marker there. The marker doesn't mention the gold. It tells the story of the Vance family, of a father, a mother, and a daughter who ventured into the wilderness on a quest for history and never returned. It honors their adventurous spirit, their love for each other, their stolen legacy. Elias looks into the dark mouth of the cave, the place where his family's dreams were both realized and extinguished. He has justice for their deaths, but he will spend the rest of his life haunted by the mystery of their final resting place, their bodies still held captive by the secrets of a greedy, evil man. It is a heartbreaking, tragic victory, a testament to a story that, even when solved, can never be truly complete.